All right, we're back with the Costello Coaching Podcast. I'm Tommy Costello with Dr. Michael Wetter, Director of Psychology at UCLA, Pediatric Psychology, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so today I'm very excited to do this with you because you offer a whole different level of insight and experience with not only your education, but your learning. And I really believe that there's a difference between being educated and learning something. And so in your experience and the conversations that we've shared leading up to this podcast, you've really offered some insights into so many different dynamics that I see in the coaching world. And for yourself, you've coached individuals in the world of psychology, and I coach athletes, but the same processes that people go through in order to kind of reach their potential or continue to work towards something are something that we clearly identify in people. And so I'm excited to share the conversation with you.
I'm excited to talk with you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really cool. So first thing, we had a phone call about 3 weeks ago, and I want to bring up this model that you spoke about, okay? It was effective, productive, and toxic. But the second one was interesting. It was productive or destructive.
Yeah.
And I want to start there because it was so impactful when you shared this with me.
Okay. So I refer to this as the three phases of stress. Okay. Stress gets a bad rap. Okay. And we think of stress as, oh my God, it's going to interfere. It's going to, it's bad. We got to get rid of it. And the fact of the matter is there's three sides or phases of stress, one of which is productive. What does productive or effective stress mean? It's giving you just enough worry, ambition, anxiety, adrenaline to get through things that otherwise you may want to put off. Okay. So effective stress is sort of the antidote for procrastination. Okay. You being able to do something in a way where it gets you through it and helps you and actually helps you achieve. Destructive or unproductive stress is where you get so worried about it or so anxious about it that literally that anxiety cycle in your mind or that worry or that, pressure can be inhibiting. In other words, you're going to do it, but now you're so worried about the performance that you quite simply can't get it to the pinnacle that you want it to do. You're limited by your own, I would say, threshold for stress. Toxic stress is where now you can't even perform. You're stuck in this cycle. And it all factors into how our brain literally processes stress. Okay. I don't know if you want me to get into it.
Yeah, no, I would love that. I would love that.
So there are two areas of our brain that I'm going to focus on when we start talking about stress, although the brain is certainly more complex than that. We have the amygdala, okay? And the amygdala is sort of that structure of our brain, the reptilian brain, the primitive brain, that is responsible for that fight or flight mechanism, okay? It's sort of, I'll call it anxiety central. It alerts us. It's the alarm. Okay, the amygdala signals us to when we perceive a threat. We all have it. Okay, there's another part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is kind of what makes us human. Okay, it allows for that really important component of executive functioning. It allows us to problem solve, to plan ahead, to regulate the way we feel, to deal with adversity, okay, to navigate things. It's a really important part. The amygdala, or that autonomic functioning of fight or flight, will always overrule executive functioning.
Yeah, so
okay?
The logic and reason will get overruled by the amygdala.
Yeah, okay, because if there is a threat, everything else has to be put aside for a moment.
Yeah.
Okay? Nothing wrong with that. Once we assess the degree of threat, our prefrontal cortex kicks back in and we're able to say, okay, here's how I'm going to problem solve. However, if your amygdala becomes so overstimulated that everything now perceives as an urgent threat or let's just say an overly threatening threat, okay, the prefrontal cortex doesn't have a chance to do what it's supposed to do. And so you are now ruled by this governing sense of anxiety and threat. That's when it becomes toxic. That's when you can't perform. And I think it's being able to understand in the case of pediatrics and adolescents, okay, At what point is the stress your child may be feeling, is it productive? Is it destructive? Or is it toxic? And if so, what tools can you give your kid in order to thrive and have just enough where it's productive and effective, but doesn't venture into or cross the threshold for destructive or toxic?
Yeah, there's so many different avenues you could go down in terms of talking about the dynamics of stress in regards to someone in their adolescence, a child, a family dynamic. But as you were speaking, I was thinking of two different people, which is probably just the way my brain works in regards to the stress levels. Is number one, I was thinking about if you were the president of the United States, right?
Yeah.
And the stress associated with that.
Sure.
And then two, an NFL quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why those two images kept coming up for me.
Both high stress level positions.
Yep. And
one gets paid more.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But one that gets to give $1 million speeches once they retire.
Absolutely.
So,
and has a little bit more influence on world dynamics. Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
So how do those individuals, what I'm trying to understand is how do they create space or really increase their threshold for stress?
It's a great question. And I think it starts very early on. Okay. I don't think it's when they become the quarterback.
Yeah.
Okay. In the pros. I don't think it's when they get elected president. I think it happens when they're 7.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it happens when they're 10. I think it's reinforced when they're 14. Okay. And then throughout the rest of their lifespan. I think it starts, if we're going to be very honest, it starts with family.
Yeah.
Okay. That's where it starts. It doesn't start with coaching. It doesn't start with school. It starts with family and the ability to model. This is how we regulate. This is how we take care of ourselves. This is when we have a problem. How do we get through it in a way where the problem doesn't win, where the problem doesn't crush us, where we don't feel oppressed by stress, but where we work through it. Okay. And life is filled with adversity. Okay. Whether you are a starring quarterback or the president of the United States, there is adversity. So really what we're talking about at the essence is the capacity for resiliency. When we start talking about resiliency, where does that start? It starts at home. The first thing starts at home. So I think the president, whoever the president is, and whatever team the quarterback is playing for, resiliency started way back in the day, which is there are going to be things you can solve.
Yeah.
There's going to be situations you can't solve. There's going to be scenarios where you win, and there's going to be scenarios and when you lose. And how do you take those various scenarios and approach them and overcome them in a way where you don't feel in any way, shape, or form either insufficient or incapable of your ability to move forward?
Yeah. I mean, when you're speaking, I think it's really cool. You had this dynamic with me on the phone too. And if I took one of your classes when I was in college, like, I think I would be sitting there the whole class just thinking about so many different avenues that this is applicable to. And there's two parts that I was thinking of, but the first one that I want to ask you is when you say it starts within the family, right? I think of in this example, let's use the quarterback and the president as two high stress positions, right?
Sure.
A lot of times we'll find athletes that succeed at a very high level and they come from what some may say broken homes or just family dynamics that are not societal norms maybe, or what's in a Disney movie.
Sure.
And I think that might have to do with the level of resilience that person has gone through in their life and their threshold for their resilience. But then also there's this dynamic of a home that's together with maybe a more formal upbringing of support from both parents, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, grandparents, where, you know, to achieve at such a high level, they needed to be supported and kind of put in the slow cooker and taken care of and, you know, supported along their journey and had access to the right coaching, had access to the right people. And there's this fine line between we find, you know, and I have 2 guys that I train every day. One came from a single mom who had no coaching and just made it happen. And then I have one that came from a incredibly supportive family. and they're both in the same situation, you know what I mean, in their career.
Sure.
And so I don't think there's one right way or wrong way, but I think the way that we look at resilience and the way that we allow resilience to happen and we allow someone to go through adversity, I think is a really important thing to look at when we're talking about family dynamics, coaching, and development.
Well, you touched on a lot of stuff there, and if I took your college class, you would, you would spawn a lot of ideas for me. I think there's a lot of things there. What I take away from that is the difference between fostering resiliency and rescuing our children. Okay.
Yeah.
You can instill the capacity for resiliency, but what's required of that is a certain degree of stress and adversity.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, I think growing up now as a child and an emerging teen and young adult is a really tough time.
Sure.
Okay. There's been the pandemic, there's global conflict, there's incredible competition on all levels and all fronts. Okay. What my daughter has to go through now in high school is very different than what I went through in high school.
Yeah.
Even though math is math, okay, and English is English, the level of competition and the inherent message of what success means is different in today's age than it was 30, 40 years ago. Just as it was different 40 years ago and 40 years prior to that.
Yeah.
Okay. Generationally, things change. But what doesn't change is what are the basic elements of parenting. Okay. So for example, if a child, and when I say child, I mean anywhere from a 7-year-old to a 17-year-old. Okay. When a child doesn't do well on a test or on a project at school, if the parent can say, look, that happens. Okay. Even if you worked hard on it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't always get the A. Sometimes even though we worked hard, we don't always get the B. The question is not, did you work hard and deserve an A? The question is, this is the best that you could do for this given thing. You did your best. Now you move on.
Yeah.
What do you learn from this? Do you study a different way? Do you seek out some support? Did you have a bad night's sleep before the exam? Did you overthink the questions? What do you take away from it? So you use that experience as a way to build resiliency. Or are you the parent that calls the school and says, that teacher wrote just a crap exam. It was unfair. I think that you didn't teach it well enough. I think the questions were too intentionally tricky. I demand that there be a new exam. In which way are you modeling resiliency?
Sure.
Okay. Now let's take that same example and let's apply it to sports.
Yeah.
Okay. Kid strikes out. Okay. Parents are in the stands. I'm sure you've never seen this. Okay. And all of a sudden, do you take, does that then player, that child, go back and say, okay, you struck out. What do you take away from it? Do you work on your batting? Do you work on eyeing the pitch?
Yeah.
Do you work on your timing of when you swing or what is a good pitch? What's in your range? What's in your zone?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you build that mental game?
Yep.
Or are you the parent that comes down off the stands, runs onto the field, gets into the ump's face and goes, who the hell do you think you are? I could see it from up there. You know, you called a strike. It was so outside of the zone.
Sure. Saw this a couple weekends ago.
Probably saw it 30 minutes ago in some cases. Okay.
Yeah.
The fact is, are you building resiliency or are you rescuing your kid? Okay. Not to mention in that particular scenario, how do you think your kid feels now? Watching that from the dugout going, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And they won't even have that body language because they don't want to call attention to themselves more often than not. The question is not, is it important that they get the hit, the base hit, or do they get the strikeout? The question is what are they taking away from that? And how is this contributing to their development as a resilient individual? And that's, I think, what sometimes parents forget or don't even pay heed to. They're so focused on trying to get the stat. They're so focused on trying to get the success, whether it's the grade, whether it's the hit, whatever it may be. That tends to be the focus. The problem is you're losing out, meaning your child is losing out on a valuable experience.
Yeah, and the value you're saying is within the resiliency.
The value is building the resiliency. You cannot have resiliency without adversity.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a family that I'm very close with, and they kind of trademarked this term per se, but they were talking about they've had 2 sons go through cancer, and one is going through it twice. The second time, it's absolutely brutal. And they take this in stride, and they seek out all the best medical attention for their children, like as anyone would.
Sure.
And they're unbelievable. I love them dearly, and their one son has been completely dedicated to training with me, and he's become a really close friend. He's a superstar athlete. And watching him be an older brother and seeing his brothers go through this has been terrible. But what they say is that they have the adversity advantage. And I was like, I love that. Yeah. Like every time you go through something, it is an advantage, because if you have made it through it, like the old saying, like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, reigns true, because it is true. And you're developing that resilience towards whatever it takes. And I find that interesting, though, because I look at high performers and I just wonder, do certain people have a tolerance for it, or is it developed?
I think it's a little bit of both, because what you're talking about is the sort of the common stance of nature versus nurture.
Sure.
Okay. I do think that there is a genetic predisposition to certain forms of resiliency. I do think that, but I don't think it rests only with that. Okay. I think one can cultivate a state of resiliency. By the same token, someone could have a genetic predisposition to resiliency, but have that sort of nurtured out of them.
Yeah.
Okay. I really think that when we start getting into what are the mechanisms that show resiliency is fading or is not being put, it's when you start making those comments of it's not fair. Okay. Or it's just not right. Or why does this happen to me? Okay. Because it happens to everyone.
Sure.
At some point in time, it happens to everyone. It's unfair. You're right. It's unfair, but life is unfair. Okay. And life is not unfair to punish you. Okay. Life is unfair because it's random. Okay. And even if we go by the philosophy, if things happen for a reason, fine. What's the reason? What's the lesson in this? What do you take away from it? There is a quote that I very much respect and appreciate, which is, failure is the tuition we pay for success. Okay. And I think as a society and as a culture, we so get caught up in the notion that failure is bad and it must be avoided at all costs. And what we fail sometimes to recognize is that failure brings an upside with it, which is the opportunity to learn. And that's a quote that I often give many of the people I work with, which is, you can look at failure as failure, or you can look at it as a learning experience.
Yeah.
What are you going to choose to do?
Yeah. And I've had some coaches kind of use the terminology failure, they kind of remove the word failure and they say falling short. And, if we fell short, we're continuing to strive for something, which is just so great. When you sit there and you coach, I call it coaching, but what would be the medical term for what you do?
Treat, intervene, coach. It depends on the situation. Yeah.
So when you're treating a patient in clinical psychology, who do you think needs the treatment when you're working with, let's say, a 12-year-old?
Okay.
Are you listening to the 12-year-old and thinking that the 12-year-old needs the treatment, or are you thinking that the parent needs coaching?
Well,
or
yes,
when you're listening to the parent, the parent needs coaching and the kid needs treatment. And you kind of see how I flip those two?
Yes, I do.
Like, I don't know if that thought ever kind of runs through your brain.
Well, a lot of it depends on how it's presented.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a term in my industry that's called the IP, the identified patient. Okay. So in the case of a 12-year-old, the parents will bring them in and say, okay, little Johnny or little Susie, has this problem. You need to work with them on fixing it. Little Johnny or little Susie is the IP, the identified patient. Okay?
By the parent.
By the parent. I don't necessarily believe that.
Sure, you get to diagnose yourself.
I just assess and I look for information, okay? I tend to come from a philosophy and adhere to a philosophy, which is we are all part of a system, Okay. So if little Johnny or little Susie is indeed having some sort of struggle or issue, it's not because they are inherently sick or they are inherently bad. There is something that's going on in the system that is either perpetuating it, contributing to it. And as such, what can we look at in the system to either change, modify, or treat? Okay. And it's not saying that the parents now have to be the IP, okay,
Yeah.
or that the child has to be the IP. It's the system now that gets looked upon. And I think that's my responsibility, is to make that kind of differential and to see, okay? I think that whenever I work with a pediatric or adolescent patient, okay, and whether that is in a clinical sense, okay, with an actual diagnosis, or in a performance coaching sense, it's always important to see what are the strengths and what are the challenges of this individual.
Yep.
To capitalize on the strengths and to compensate for the challenges. How do you overcome that? That's not about pathology.
Yeah.
Okay. A long-standing thing that I share with in many of my lectures and when I teach also is that therapy isn't for the sick.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Therapy doesn't mean that you have mental illness. It's to protect and preserve mental health.
Yeah.
If you don't protect and preserve mental health, you will surely end up with mental illness.
Yes. Okay. So that's a funny distinction. For me, I kind of made that shift. So when I was a junior in college, I was going through some psychological challenges, and I was really struggling with things that were just happening internally within my environment. I was kind of wanted to play the blame game. I was leading myself into conversations of negativity, and I just really didn't know what to do. And I was really uncomfortable, and I was hurting. And after many conversations with my parents, they said, well, let's get you a psychologist. And so I started working with a psychologist, and we worked from, let's call it April through August.
Okay.
And we were talking on a weekly, bi-weekly basis. And I remember my mom asking me in August, how do you think you're doing with this? Like, you think you're good? And and she wasn't asking it in an ill spirit. She was just asking. And I thought to myself, yeah, like, I think I'm doing good. I don't know how to quantify this. Like,
sure. Yeah.
It's not like we can take my temperature and say, yep,
I'm good.
Yeah,
I'm all good. Yeah.
Exactly. And so anyways, we stopped, and I was fine, and, just kind of continued on, and then went through some adversity, went through some toxic adversity, and found myself reaching out to that same person. And at that point, that was probably about 25 months, over 2 years ago.
Okay.
And I started working with him, and then I was getting really consistent. I felt the improvement. I started to see the improvement. I started to see the direction and the course that my life was taking. And then I made that shift for myself, understanding that it wasn't therapy in a sense of I need healing,
right,
or physical therapy where you have an injury and you need it to get better. It's almost a protection mechanism of mental health.
Yes.
And so my consistency of Mondays at 11 a.m. are because of that. It's a protection of my mental health. And say I missed a day or two, I could actually feel that, if I only went once in a month.
Sure.
So anyways.
No, I actually think that, and it's the same message I try to give, but it's a hard message to understand, because in the field of psychology and behavioral health, there are very few tangibles.
Yes.
Okay.
Like, how do we quantify this?
That's correct.
And I'm sure so many parents want the quantification.
Well, and so many parents say, like, well, you seem good, we can stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's the answer to that?
Well, the answer is you don't. You may modify. Okay?
Yeah, but you don't stop.
But you don't
the work.
stop, So if I see somebody weekly, it's like, let's go to, every other week. Let's go bi-weekly. Okay.
Let's just make sure we check in, though.
Well, it's like let's just say, let's bring it back to performance in terms of athletics. Okay. Let's say that you go to practice and you are on the top of your game. Do you stop practice?
No.
But you're at the top of your game.
Yeah.
Okay. So why do you have to keep doing this?
Yep.
You're great. Okay. Because if you stop doing it, you're not going to feel so great. And again, that's the message I give. Okay. Which is mental health is not a taboo term.
Oh.
Neither is mental illness, by the way. Okay. But the way
why does it, not to get you cut off,
sure.
but why is
it taboo?
Why is mental health taboo, or why is mental illness taboo? Like when I'm a college athlete, for example, and they're like, hey, we're going to go do this mental health talk.
Yeah.
We'd be like, oh my God.
Yeah. Well, because it's like, we get it. Fine. Whatever. It's, we're fine. Okay. We feel fine. We're functioning fine. Why do we have to talk about something that isn't an issue?
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, it is an issue. Okay. Our mental health is everything.
Yep.
We tend to focus more somatically. So if something is wrong with our body, then it really needs okay, because then we can't function.
Yeah.
Last I checked, without our brain, we don't function very well either.
Yes.
The problem with that is the brain is a structure. Okay. The mind isn't a structure at all.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a concept, the mind. It's not tangible. You can't touch the mind. You can't see the mind. You can't MRI or X-ray the mind. So you can't see where it's broken. So if somebody all of a sudden says, I'm not feeling well, or I don't feel like myself, or something's off, or I'm anxious, people say, well, just brush it off. Nothing's broken. You're fine. Nothing tangible. Just shake it off. Just relax. I don't understand why you're getting so upset. Or they internalize it and don't say anything because they don't want to look like people are going to think that I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. Mental health and mental illness are far different than crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's still a stigma. Okay. That's why, for example, performance coaching is not the same as therapy.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is not the same as psychiatry, which is not the same as neurology. They're all different manifestations of behavior. Why wouldn't you want to pay more attention to increasing your mental game? Why wouldn't you? If you're an athlete, if you're a performer, if you're an actor or an actress, why wouldn't you want to work on that?
Yep.
Okay. You're developing your muscles. You don't want to develop your mind?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you? And why, and this is a question I put out to parents, during childhood and adolescence, when the mind is more plastic, okay, when you have the greatest chance to develop the mind and the brain in a way that's going to last for decades, that's the period of time where you have the best chance of your intervention. Why would you wait until later when there's a problem?
For sure.
Why not intervene now? And the fact of the matter is, it's not that parents are bad or they're wrong. They just don't know.
Yep.
Okay. They're not being told that. They're not being supported in that. They're not being educated in that. And I think when presented with, it's like, here is one more way to help your child develop the mental edge, the mental game, the resiliency, the fortitude to deal with whatever they need to deal with. This is the way. This is the path. They're not sick. They're not crazy. This is just like going and getting a coach and doing private training. Well, but it's a lot of money. Well, but you're spending a fortune on equipment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
This is but they're fine. Or, what FINE stands for. I'm not going to say it on here, but basically, effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fine.
Huh.
Okay.
You're allowed to say it on here, by the way.
Okay. Fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. Okay. The bottom line is that if you really want to give your child every advantage, don't ignore the mental. It's so critical, and it's so easy to intervene at any point in time.
And we go back to this question.
Sure.
It was in this, so Doc here has got 2 books, What Went Right and then Earn It. And I was just messing around. He had just given me these before we started the podcast. And there's questions that open the book here on page 8. And I asked the question, and I think this has to go with the mental training.
Sure.
Right? So I think when people hear these questions, or when they hear these podcasts or they hear these comments, their brains go right to, well, how do we do that?
Right.
Like if their son wants to get better at hitting, for example, or kicking the soccer ball or shooting hoops or whatever it is, you find someone who teaches you that mechanism. Well, it's really hard to decipher on who knows how to teach the mental game.
Right.
Right. And like, who's qualified to teach the mental game? And then well, okay, this person has this PhD in psychology, but do they understand the sport that I'm playing? And I think as an athlete, like I really struggled with that too, is like the psychologist I started working with, I wanted him to be able to present me with the ideas of, well, no, like when I take the mound, I don't want to feel this way. And I just want to be able to pitch and not feel insecure.
Right.
And not feel, the pressure, not feel the sweaty palms. Like, you got any tricks for that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's
Exactly.
where the athlete's brain goes.
Sure.
Like, let me hear that hack that like makes you feel good and focused.
Sure. Yeah.
And I obviously didn't understand it then, but I understand it now. And he kind of went right, like old school, but he went right to family dynamics with me.
Yeah.
Because that's where we all kind of have to take the journey to.
Like I said, it starts with family.
It starts with the family.
Yeah.
But I think maybe if you're a parent listening to this, because I get a lot of parents who listen to this, and you want to help your kid with their mental fortitude, where's a good place to start?
Well, again, I think that the first thing is talk to your child. Okay. That's the very first thing. And by the way, more often than not, when you ask your son or daughter, do you want to go to, see a psychologist, or do you want to see a therapist, or do you want to talk to somebody? The answer invariably is going to be like, no. Okay.
Yeah.
Or I don't know. Because again, there is a stigma. Okay. There's a social stigma, but it's really understanding where your child is at. Okay. So rather than saying and jumping right to it, do you want to get help? Rather say, I'm wondering if you're struggling. Okay. Are you struggling? Or, it seems like you're getting upset about something. We want to understand. Okay. We want to help you. We want to support you. What can we do to help you? What can we do to support you? What is it you need? But that's not just a one-time conversation.
Yeah. Cause most of the time, like a kid who's a teenager would be like, no, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Or how did practice go, son? Good.
Yeah. How did it go? Fine. Okay. What'd you learn? Stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. What are you going to do next time? I don't know. Okay. And that's fine. It's more than that. It's not just listening to what they're saying. It's observing them. Sure. Okay. There is a language that is greater than our vocabulary.
When is the best time to have these conversations?
I think when sometimes it's over dinner. Okay. Sometimes it's when you're just kind of messing around. Okay?
Sure.
It's not when things are at their lowest. It's not when things are at their most tense. Okay.
Or even at their highest.
Or at their highest. It's just finding those
medium grounds.
I just call them those quiet moments in between.
Okay. So I'm going to go into a little story of, I think, one of the greatest coaches I know. His name's Jack Wilson. He was actually the first episode on this podcast.
Okay.
And Jack Wilson played 12 years in the big leagues. He's an undersized guy from Thousand Oaks who played junior college baseball, who got drafted out of junior college because he threw a ball 92 off the mound, but he was a shortstop and he was determined to be a shortstop. Makes it through the minor leagues and becomes a silver slugger, has the record for the most double plays turned, statistically one of the best, the best fielding defensive shortstop to ever play the game.
Wow.
So incredible man with high level of resilience. But as much as he was an all-star when he played, he was actually an MLB all-star. His style of coaching is so all-star. And his son, and the way he coached his son. And so I got to watch this because his son played with my younger brother. And I was a little bit older. I was the recruit that was in high school, kind of going to the Pac-12 level and playing multiple sports, multiple Division I offers in both sports, doing the whole thing. And I'd get to kind of observe. And his son, I always saw was like behind. Like it always looked like he was so behind. And Jack would never like get upset with him, but he'd coach the crap out of him. And they'd be doing these drills and drills and drills and drills. And I have this little thing where I think that there's people who know nothing, and you'll identify with this being in your seat that you live in.
Sure.
You're in your career. There's people that know nothing, and those people are sometimes hard to work with or easy to work with, and it doesn't matter.
Right.
Then there's people who know something, and they're so determined around that something. And then there's people that know so much that they can make the people who know nothing understand it. And they can come to a compromise with the person who knows something that's trying to fight it. And so Jack kind of was that last person.
Mm-hmm.
He knew so much that he didn't even know how much he knew. And so when I study him now and I watch him, everything he was doing
Mm-hmm.
was for his son neurologically,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of his development with the sport.
Mm-hmm.
It was all around the sport. It was
Mm-hmm.
all around the skill. It
Mm-hmm.
was all around the development.
Mm-hmm.
It was never about the big tournament. It was
Mhm.
never about the stats.
Yeah.
It was never about those things. It was all about the development.
Right.
Then I have him on my podcast and I say, Jack, I say, if you had any advice to give to parents, what would the advice be?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, my biggest piece of advice that I'd give to parents is to control the car ride home. And I was like, yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
He said the car ride home is where the kid either learns to hate the sport,
Mm-hmm.
love the sport,
Mm-hmm.
or you give them the space in between.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have the ability as the parent
Mm-hmm.
to control the car ride home,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to help your son out the most with this game.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm thinking about the car ride home and, you know, what the parent could or could not be saying in that car ride.
It's a lot. Okay. And it can, and I very much agree with that notion. Okay. Because you can basically trash talk the other team.
Yep.
Okay.
Trash talk the coach.
The coach, the umpire, you can trash, the ref, you can trash talk your child. You know, you didn't perform well enough. Or what the hell was that play? You know, you got to get your head in the game. You can do all those things. You can sit there and go, it was a great game. Whether you won or whether you lost, it was a great game to watch. What do you want to do tonight? Okay.
Yeah.
And the idea here is there are going to be plenty of moments and opportunities to talk about improvement. Okay. To talk about learning, to talk about rewatching footage or better, honing in your skills or whatever. At that moment in time, what that child needs, because remember, we're still talking about a child.
Yeah.
Okay. What they need is not a coach. They don't need a tutor. They don't need a therapist or a doctor or anybody. They need a parent.
Yep. Just be my dad or be my mom.
That's what they need in that moment in time. So be their parent.
What does the parent do?
Loves their kid.
Yeah. I love that.
That's it. Love your kid. Okay. Let your kid know that no matter what happens on the field, on the track, no matter what, you love them, you care for them, you're there for them unconditionally.
And let me define this too.
Yeah.
Trash talking the other team,
Yeah.
making excuses about the umpire, blaming the coach is not loving your kid.
No, it's setting your kid up for failure.
Yeah, loving your kid is just being present and knowing that they're loved.
Loving them, and all, yes, knowing that they're loved. And also if they say that was horrible or that team was, they cheated.
Sure.
Because, that's where you can redirect them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's love also, which is to say, it may feel that way right now. Okay. But the bottom line is in every game, there's going to be somebody who wins and there's going to be somebody who loses and there's going to be mistakes or whatnot.
Yeah.
It's not about fault.
Nah, that's umpires, buddy. That's
You just
how it goes
pass it off.
sometimes. Yep.
If you get equally upset or you start going into the blame game, that's what you're teaching them.
You're going to be in a spin cycle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I got a personal question for you then.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm hosting a tryout for this travel ball team.
Okay.
And I did not I hosted a Zoom call before I started a travel ball team.
Okay.
And I clearly identified what my objectives were.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be objective about measurement. We weren't going to be subjective about, the judgment of the players.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to continue to stay on this metric-based system,
Mm-hmm.
or we're continuing to strive towards the development side. So how fast you run, how hard you throw,
Mm-hmm.
your health,
Mm-hmm.
your mental health, all these components.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly I watched my intentions drift away
Mm-hmm.
as a coach and as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And I fell into the rat race of what that world of travel baseball is about.
Okay.
And it became about, no, we need to play in this tournament.
Yeah.
No, we need to do this. No, we need to have these uniforms. No, we need to have practice. Okay. Yep. I understand. Well, we're going to go play for another team if you don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And 90% of me would be like, okay, no problem. Go find another team.
Mm-hmm.
And then 10% of me would be like, shoot, if we lose this kid, then I'm not going to have a team for kids to coach.
Right.
So I found myself as a leader just kind of getting mixed up in what my intention was for why I was doing it
Mm-hmm.
and what the results were of it.
Mm-hmm.
So now as I go into this tryout and we'll have probably 30, 35 kids trying out for 14 spots.
Mm-hmm.
I want to have a real clear conversation with these parents about not why am I different, but where I think that this world needs to go towards for the betterment of their child. And I really want to ask you, what is the best way to approach parents about this? Because they get fearful of something being different.
Right. That's a great question. And I'll give you my thought, but that doesn't mean it's the answer.
Sure.
Okay?
That's classic psychologist.
Totally. Okay.
Yeah.
Dress for the role.
Yeah.
I think you begin with the question of, let's define what we mean by success. What does it mean to be successful? Okay. That's what you start with. Okay. Because as we start this clinic or we start this training or we start this endeavor, let's be clear on what our objective is. And if we're going to say our objective is to be successful, let's define what we mean by that. And if what your definition of successful isn't aligned with what our definition of successful is, then we have to question whether it's a good fit. But I can tell you why my approach and definition of successful, I can tell you why and how this is going to help your child in the long run.
Beautiful. I love that. Yeah. Because if you ask them a question, you then put the ball back in their court to kind of sit and think about it.
And more importantly, you're aligned with their interests. There's not one parent there who wants their kid to do poorly.
Sure.
Okay. This isn't about that they don't love their children. It's the fact that sometimes, like you, they get lost along the way. They get caught up in the rat race. They get caught up on statistics and and let's face it, in the world of, youth sports.
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody's being sold a lottery ticket saying you have a chance of winning the big time.
Yep.
Okay. The big value. And the irony is you actually have a better chance of winning the lottery than getting all the way to the top.
Sure.
Okay. But, parents still, and by the way, it's not just sports. Okay. It's movies, it's dance,
music,
it's singing, it's everything. Okay.
Yep.
It's everything.
Reaching the pinnacle.
This is the ticket. Okay. To wealth, to fame, to success, to all those things, to scholarships. Okay. To opportunities, all those things. This is your golden ticket. This is your Willy Wonka moment. Okay, this is it. Who wouldn't want to do everything possible to ensure that? So when they're presented with something contrary to that, their first understandable response is to say, whoa, no, we're not going to do that. Okay, because everybody else is doing this. So the key is to tie it in. That's part of what I do when I work with, not at UCLA, but in my private practice when I do performance coaching. Okay, when I work with young athletes, when I work with young talent in any industry, my goal and what I educate parents on, and as well as the kids, is the goal here is not to get you to the major leagues. Okay, that's your coach. That's your desire. Okay, my goal is to make sure that no matter what happens, you can handle it.
Yep.
And that you can do your best, and that you're going to be in that zone.
Yeah.
You got sweaty palms, use talcum powder. Okay, but if you really want to work on your mental game. Your mental game is going to get you through life.
Yep.
Not just the sport, not just the audition, through life. That's your resiliency. That's what we build. If you can tie that in, okay, that's what you present. You're engaging with the family. And that's what I think this is all about. Okay. Yeah. Those parents who are listening to this podcast, they're listening to it for a reason. Okay. They want to know, what can we do?
Yep.
How do we support? So I'm speaking to them, which is you're doing everything you can. Okay. Make sure that what you do has a payoff beyond just the game.
Yep.
Okay. And I think that's what you're talking
Exactly.
about. I think that's your philosophy. I think that's what distinguishes you from any other person out there.
Yeah. Sports. And I like saying sports is the mechanism in which we learn life.
Yeah.
And so, what's funny for me too is this dynamic that I get to work within. So last week, was flown to Arizona to work with 14 big professional baseball players, a couple big leaguers, minor league guys, and go train them and work with them and talk with them. And I was working with a pitcher, and the intricacies and the details that it was an early morning. We were the only one at this facility, and we were working on his toe control and this and that, and so many little details that added up. And then when we go into the work, the gratification and the attention to detail that this professional had on every word I was saying about the details of his craft, because he felt the difference. He could feel almost like a spiritual sense of the draw and the energy towards what was happening and how this all connected to him and his success and him taking care of his family and his newly born daughter. And, just like all of it like matters to these guys. Yeah. And so they're so drawn into what I have to say. And then I rewind the clock 6 days prior, and I'm speaking to a bunch of 13-year-olds, and I might as well be, doofus who doesn't know anything. And it's like, guys, like, and I don't blame them. Like, no shame, no blame on those 13-year-olds. Like, they're 13-year-old brains. That's fine. Yeah. But it's like, guys, like the same guy, and the kind of what I want to explain to the parents in a way is like the same guy that is helping this guy who throws 97, helping him throw 100 and making sure that he's worth $10 million next year versus 800,000. I'm here for your son. Like, it's the same person and with the same information. And I want to share it with you, to not say that I have the intention of making every single person a big leaguer here, but to just give them the skills that are required in order to embody that. I'm going to share with you something I actually share with a lot of my patients. Okay. In fact, I say it usually at the outset. Okay. I am not going to work harder than you at your life. I'm willing to meet you 50-50. Okay. That's pretty generous. No, if you're here and I'm here, we'll work on it together. But I'm not going to fix your life for you. Yeah. And I'm not going to work harder at it. Okay. If you don't show up, no skin off my back. Okay. If you don't engage, no skin off my back, but then you don't get any benefit. So you have to show up. You have to want this more than I do for you. You have to want this for yourself. So when we start talking about that 13-year-old mind, okay, that 13-year-old brain, and they're thinking, well, this is doofus. I don't, what do I need to hear? The first question I have is like, what do you want? Why are you here? What is it that you want? I want to play ball. Do you just want to play ball like casually? Is that what you want to do? Because there's a park over there. You can go for it. Sure. Knock yourself out. Yeah. I'll get you some guys, No. I want to go all the way. You want to go all the way. What does that mean? Go all the way. I want to go. What are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to give up? To give 100, you can't give 100% of everything in your life. No. So if you're not going to give 100% to certain other things, and this is what you're going to give 100% to, how is tuning out to what I'm saying given 100%? Because that seems to be incongruent with what you just said. Yeah, you're lacking curiosity here. So I ask you again, what do you want? It's not about convincing them. Yeah. Okay. It's about getting them to access that desire, getting them to engage, tapping into, like you said, that curiosity, but also the drive. It means sometimes doing things 100 times over that you don't want to do. It means listening to things that normally you wouldn't want to listen to. Okay. It's about doing things and putting yourself out there because ultimately this is what you want. Yeah. Not what I want for you, what you want. Huh. That's so good, because I think what the greatest coaches that I've had, they typically ask the best questions. Yeah. So like there's a guy named Tom House who's a guru throwing coach, and He had Nolan Ryan, Randy Johnson, Tom Brady, Drew Brees. The list goes on forever.
Wow. Yeah.
Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
And I got to work with Tom, and Tom mentored me, and he plays a huge role. Like, he shows up in my dreams. This guy is like, he played a huge role in my life, you know?
Yeah.
And he, out of all the coaches that I've ever had, he asked the best questions. And his questions would make me think. And your questions make me think. Mm-hmm. And certain people that know how to teach at that super, super in-depth level know how to ask the questions to help the person kind of unveil what they're supposed to learn.
Well, it's the very nature of the Socratic method.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good old Socrates.
Oh, Socrates. You know, he was around before all of us. You know, and the idea here is I actually do believe that a good question is better than a fair answer. You know, if you ask a good question, it gets a person to think. That's what you want. You don't want to tell people what to do. You want them to think about it. You want them to marinate in it. You want, like you said, curiosity. I want to spark the brain. That's what I want, okay? When we talk about performance, when we talk about being in that zone, it's not about being passive. It's not just being there and like, all right, I'm here, and whatever happens, happens. It's about being proactive in that moment. What are you going to do in that moment? How are you sizing it up? Everything is about learning in that moment in time, but you can't learn if you're not curious. It just won't work.
Maintain curiosity.
Maintain curiosity and spark engagement.
Spark engagement. So as a leader, you must maintain curiosity in the people that you're coaching, but then you got to have mechanisms in which to spark engagement.
But if engagement isn't there, curiosity doesn't matter. They can be curious, but if they're not engaged,
it doesn't
go anywhere. And again, that's something that can be done at home as well. Okay. And by the way, parents may be sometimes more overly engaged than their kids.
Yeah. How do you evaluate that?
You know, I don't know how much of it is so much evaluated as it is, again, talking to the child. If you see that, you know, parents are there, they're dedicated, they're getting all the equipment, they're getting all the training, and the kid's just kind of going through the motions but doesn't seem to be there, I think then that's the conversation, which is, you know, again, what do you want? And there's been times where I've spoken with, a teen who says, I'm just doing this because my parents have put everything in it.
That happens all the time.
And it's like, do you want to do it? Well, I feel bad if I don't. But that doesn't mean you want to. And now we're in a dynamic where they feel guilty if they don't want to pursue something that isn't what their parents are investing in. And that is, I've seen what happens on the other side of that. It's not good.
It's the pizza you got to pull out of the oven.
It's the pizza you pull out of the, again, we were talking about this notion, okay? And I'll say it again just for the sake of this. It's the difference between what I consider pediatrics, adolescence, and then later adulthood when it comes to therapy and intervention. I use the analogy of the pizza, okay? When we think of kids, whether it's preteen or teen, I think of a pizza that you're making, okay? You put your sauce, you put your cheese, you put your toppings, and then you look at it, and you're like, I put mushrooms. I really don't want mushrooms. Let me take them off, okay? I want pepperoni. Let me put pepperoni. I put too much cheese. Let me take some of that cheese off, okay? And you make it the way you want it to be. And then you look at it, you go, that's good. Now it's good. Let's put it in the oven. Let's bake it. That's adolescence. That's pediatrics. You have an opportunity to make changes before it sets. Adulthood is you take the pizza out of the oven and go, oh, I put too many mushrooms on. I don't like that. You take them off the melted cooked cheese, but it still leaves a dent. It still leaves an impression. Even though you can remove them, some of the flavor kind of baked into it. Some of the cheese now looks a little grody because you picked it off afterwards. Ooh, I put too much cheese on there. Well, it's hard to remove all that excess cheese. I can do it, but it doesn't look pretty. It doesn't feel as natural. That's adulthood. Okay. Once your pizza is cooked, you can make changes to it, but it's much harder to do so and keep things nice and, feeling intuitive and natural.
Yeah.
That's why adolescence is such a key time in life.
I think that's a great place to end this.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm incredibly grateful for not only your presence, but also your intelligence and everything you're sharing and how it's going to help the people that listen to this.
Oh, you're very kind.
You're doing a great service by doing your work in the way that you're doing it.
Thank you. I hope we get to do this again.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah.
We will for sure.
Absolutely.